I stared at Mark in disbelief as he approached me with a grin, taunting, "You can't even cook, so you should leave Lala." His audacity left me speechless, as if he believed he had every right to say such things. There was no way I would allow my parents to move into my house without my permission, let alone try to evict me, the rightful owner. Mark's controlling behavior had been bothering me for a while, but now it was becoming unbearable. I couldn't continue like this with him. I decided it was time for Mark to face consequences. My name is Sarah, a woman in my 40s, managing both a job and a household where I live with my husband Mark. Mark, whom some might call a house husband, takes care of domestic chores while I work to support us financially. Despite my efforts to maintain a stable life, Mark's domineering personality complicates things. It's not that I have anything against a husband staying at home, but even without a job, Mark acts as if he's the authority in our home, making decisions and issuing demands. "I'm exhausted today. Could you get me some ice cream?" he casually requests at 11 p.m. from the living room. The convenience store wasn't far, but after a tough day at work, his entitled attitude grated on my nerves. "Why don't you go get it yourself? It's just a short walk to the store," I retorted, my tone colder than I intended. Mark's behavior was wearing thin on my patience. But instead of accepting my refusal, Mark chuckled dismissively and warned, "Is that how you think you should behave? You never know what might happen if you upset your husband." Mark had always asserted himself with statements like, "I'm the man of this house and I protect it, so you need to respect that." His presumption of superiority simply because he was my husband frustrated me to no end. Each time he asserted his dominance, I felt increasingly harassed and unwilling to engage. In that moment, I realized that managing Mark alongside my already demanding job was becoming unbearable. I calmly stated, "I'm really tired. I'm sorry. I need to rest in my room." Mark, clearly displeased with my demeanor, intercepted me, his voice laced with anger. "Wait, what's with that attitude towards your husband? I could kick you out right now if I wanted to. Do you think it's okay to upset your spouse like that? Who did he think he was fooling, playing the role of the boss when he didn't contribute to our livelihood? He could upset me whenever he pleased, yet I was expected to tiptoe around his fragile ego. It felt like dealing with a child's tantrum. "I'm sorry, but I'm really exhausted. Please try to understand," I managed to say with a forced smile, desperate to end the conversation. Mark sighed deeply and muttered, "You're such a disappointment as a wife." Exhausted and unable to muster a response, I simply apologized once more and retreated to my room. Day by day, Mark's oppressive behavior wore me down further, leaving me too drained to confront him. Then, one day, I fell ill with a severe cold. The doctor diagnosed it as stress-induced fever, and my first thought was of Mark. Too sick to move, I had no choice but to take a day off work and stay in bed. When I informed Mark of my condition, he snapped, "A cold? That's just an excuse. Go to work, you're useless." His words felt like a stab to my already feverish body. To make matters worse, he added, "I'm not going to take care of you. This is your problem. Deal with it." Left alone in my room, I groaned in agony from the fever. There were no ice packs or any sign of care. Too weak to help myself, I dreaded facing Mark again, fearing more verbal abuse. My temperature soared to 103 degrees Fahrenheit. The fever was so intense that my body drenched in sweat, yet I couldn't even muster the strength to change my damp clothes. I began to entertain dark thoughts. Wouldn't it be easier if I just passed away? These haunting thoughts kept me awake through a painful, lonely night. The feeling of isolation and despair was unbearable as darkness settled in. All I wanted was for Mark to show some concern, not necessarily to cure my fever, but perhaps to fetch an ice pack, offer a cool compress, and ask, "Are you okay?" But that hope remained a distant fantasy. Instead, his hurtful words pierced my heart, deepening my anguish and stirring up new anxieties. Why am I the only one feeling like this? What did I do wrong? Why can't things be better with Mark? These questions unleashed a flood of tears that I couldn't hold back. The pain was overwhelming. After 3 days of rest, my fever finally subsided, allowing me to return to work. Concerned colleagues and bosses asked, "Are you sure you're all right?" Their genuine worry contrasted sharply with Mark's indifference. Their kindness moved me deeply, nearly bringing me to tears. I realized I was nearing an emotional breaking point. A voice inside me screamed that I couldn't continue with Mark any longer. Yet I pushed these thoughts aside, burying myself in work to support our household. Deep down, I knew this unsustainable pace couldn't last forever. Someday, I would hit my limit and wouldn't be able to bounce back. I was well aware of this, but I couldn't muster the courage to confront the situation or contemplate preparing for a life without Mark. My affection for him had faded, but I felt trapped by my circumstances. How could I navigate these conflicting emotions and worries? Every day, I returned home exhausted, only to be tossed around by Mark's whims. It was a relentless cycle. Then one day, while I was relaxing in my room, Mark called out, "I need to discuss something important. Come here." It had been a while since we had a serious conversation. Typically, Mark made decisions without consulting me, so his sudden seriousness made me uneasy. As I sat down to talk, Mark, unusually excited, declared, "I've decided to let my parents move into this house. You can't even cook, so leave the law," he blurted out, catching me completely off guard. "What? You want me to leave so your parents can move in?" I was unable to accept the reality of Mark's selfish remarks, but he pressed on regardless of my feelings. He insisted on changing the deed to include his parents, effectively claiming ownership of the house for them. He also proposed divorcing me to start a new family, stating it was already decided and my objections wouldn't sway him. His disregard for my feelings left me dizzy. When I suggested my parents could live with us instead, Mark dismissed it, claiming his duty as the man of the house required him to care for his own family's needs first. It became clear to me that continuing with Mark was no longer an option. My heart told me it was impossible. Mark, oblivious to my emotional turmoil, chuckled arrogantly and said, "You love me so much, right? I know this is shocking coming from your loving husband, but I have to prioritize my family. Please understand." His condescending tone infuriated me. I wanted to retort, "That's not love at all." Any affection I once felt for Mark had evaporated. All that remained was disbelief at his selfish actions and regret for not ending things sooner. Why hadn't I severed ties with him earlier? If I had, perhaps Mark wouldn't have taken advantage of me like this. Selfish and arrogant to the core. I despised my past self for being too weak, for not having the courage to let go of Mark sooner. Despite feeling overwhelmed, Mark seemed to misunderstand, thinking I still loved him deeply and didn't want a divorce. But the truth was far from that. I had long lost any affection for him and now felt only disgust towards his actions. To make my stance crystal clear, I spoke up, "I'm leaving." Mark was taken aback. Clearly, he hadn't expected me to agree to a divorce and leave so decisively. He needed to brace himself. Tough times were ahead for him. The old me, always bailing Mark out, was gone. From now on, regardless of what happens to Mark, I won't be there to support him. We won't be a couple anymore. Seeing my resolve, Mark looked shocked and froze in place. I seized the moment to retreat to my room and pack my essentials. Larger items would have to wait. I might need to hire movers later. As I prepared to leave, Mark hurriedly approached me, his voice pleading, "Are you sure about this? If we divorce, we'll become strangers." I replied with a forced smile, masking my inner relief, "I've already fallen out of love with you." Letting go feels like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Mark stood there, visibly lost for words. I nodded firmly, whispered a quiet "thank you for everything," and walked out of the house. Mark watched me leave with a worried expression etched on his face. After returning to my parents' place and explaining everything, they were understandably furious with Mark's behavior initially. However, once they understood I had a clear plan, they supported me and helped me recuperate while I handled necessary matters. The first step was initiating the divorce. After sending the divorce papers, I received a message from Mark asking, "Are you sure about this?" "I no longer have feelings for you," I replied honestly. Dragging this out would only complicate things further. "I feel much lighter now that you're gone," I added. There was no response from him after that. A few days later, I received completed divorce papers from Mark, ready for my signature. I quickly filled out my sections and submitted them to the county office the same day. Now Mark and I are strangers. I no longer bear the responsibility of supporting the household as his wife. During the divorce, we divided our assets, with Mark claiming the house as his own, which had been his insistence from the start. It was never comfortable for me, so letting go was a relief. Instead, I pursued alimony from Mark. Since he wasn't working, his parents covered the payments, though Mark is now actively seeking employment, likely with the intention to repay them once he secures a job. However, reality doesn't always unfold as planned. A month had passed since the divorce was finalized, and I had settled into a peaceful life in my new home when I received an unexpected call from Mark. Irritated by the intrusion, I reluctantly answered, already anticipating the reason behind his contact. Ignoring him could lead to complications, so I braced myself to confront whatever issue he had. "Hello. What do you want after all this time?" I asked, my patience wearing thin as I urged him to get to the point. Mark's pleading tone immediately grated on me. "Please help me," Mark pleaded desperately, catching me off guard with his urgency. His plea made me chuckle wryly. I knew Mark must have found himself in trouble, but I hadn't expected it to be this serious. "All right, what's the problem? You'll have to tell me," I insisted, wanting him to spell out his predicament. Mark hesitated before explaining, stumbling over his words. He had taken over the house after our divorce and managed fine for a month. However, he recently faced a hefty rent payment. Unemployed and unable to cover the costs himself, he turned to my former in-laws, who lived on a pension, for financial assistance. The bill amounted to a staggering $1,800, far beyond what they could afford. "My ex-in-laws are furious. They blame me for this mess," Mark lamented tearfully over the phone. "I didn't realize the rent would be so high. The place is in chaos now. What are you going to do about it?" Mark's frustration turned towards me, implying I was somehow responsible. While I regretted not discussing the rent beforehand, I couldn't help but feel he had brought this upon himself with his hasty decision to take over the house without understanding its financial obligations. He treated me like an outsider and pushed me away, and now this was the outcome. Despite the results of his own actions, he couldn't accept it and instead reached out to me for help. I couldn't help but sigh at his audacity, but without paying attention to how I felt, Mark continued, "Please, I need your help. We can't go on like this. I need you. You still care about me, right? If someone you care about is in trouble, you should help them out." I replied coldly, my frustration and despair towards Mark bubbling up inside me. "No, I have no obligation to help you. You were the one who cut me off, remember? Now you want my help when it's convenient for you." My words were genuine, devoid of pretense. Mark attempted to defend himself, pleading, "Please, it'll be so cold. I really can't do this without you. Whether you still love me or not doesn't matter now. We used to be married, right? Can't you help me out just this once?" "No," I asserted firmly. "You were the one who left me, and long before that, my feelings for you have faded. It's been a long time since I stopped loving you." I could hear the disappointment in Mark's voice on the other end of the line. "I can't believe it," he murmured. "I endured so much, despite your selfishness, taking me for granted, even mistreating me when I was sick. I stayed by your side, trying to salvage our marriage, working hard for the life we had together, and this is what it's come to. Why didn't I leave sooner when my love for him faded? Why didn't I distance myself from Mark earlier?" These regrets flooded in, mingling with the anger I felt towards him. Mark had never truly seen me, never shown concern, never protected me, never walked hand in hand through life as a partner. Instead, he treated me like a mere maid, a money-making machine. Each time, he remained oblivious to my despair. And now, despite it all being his doing, he comes pleading for help, painting himself as the victim. "Please help me, I'm begging you. How about we get married again? We'll start over properly this time. I promise I'll never kick you out again." I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly at Mark's desperate proposal. "Remarry you? Are you serious? Everything that's happened is because of your actions. I tried to work things out in my own way for so long, tried to make you see me. And now you want to pretend none of it ever happened. You want me to go back to those hellish days? That's never going to happen. I'm not returning to that life, no matter what." My emotions surged, tears welling up. I couldn't discern whether they were from anger or sadness. Mark remained silent in response to my outpouring. Unable to bear any more of the conversation, I simply said goodbye and ended the call. Mark didn't try to contact me again, and determined never to hear his voice, I blocked his number.